I had been single for a while and decided to give Tinder a try. I swiped through countless profiles, but none of them caught my eye until I stumbled upon a man named John. His profile picture was a bit blurry, but he had a charming smile, so I decided to give him a chance. We agreed to meet up at a coffee shop near my apartment. As I walked into the shop, I noticed a man sitting in the corner, hunched over a cup of coffee. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and his hair was unkempt. I thought to myself, surely, this can't be John. But as I got closer, he looked up and greeted me by name. It was indeed him. I was taken aback by his appearance, but I didn't want to be rude, so I sat down and tried to make conversation. As we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about John. He seemed to have a strange glint in his eye, and his speech was slurred. He kept insisting that we go back to his place to watch a movie, but I declined, citing an early morning meeting. As we said our goodbyes, John gave me a hug, and I recoiled at the stench of alcohol on his breath. I quickly made my way out of the coffee shop and back to my apartment. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about John. I decided to do a bit of digging and found out that he was a well-known homeless man in the area, often spotted rummaging through garbage cans and muttering to himself. I felt sick to my stomach, realizing that I had gone on a date with a creepy, homeless man. I immediately deleted my Tinder account and swore off online dating forever. From that day on, I always made sure to carefully screen any potential dates and never let my guard down again. The experience with John taught me to trust my instincts and never ignore red flags, no matter how small they may seem. However, the nightmare was far from over. A few days after our date, I started receiving strange messages from John on social media. They were nonsensical and often included creepy, disturbing images. I blocked him, but he would create new accounts and continue to message me. One night, I was walking home from work when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw John stumbling towards me. He had a crazed look in his eyes, and I knew I was in trouble. I started to run, but he was too fast. He tackled me to the ground, and I screamed for help, but no one came. John pinned me down and started to laugh maniacally. He revealed that he had been watching me for weeks and had become obsessed with me. He said that he would never let me go and that we would be together forever. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. Just when I thought it was all over, a group of people came running towards us, drawn by the sound of my screams. They managed to pull John off me and held him down until the police arrived. I was taken to the hospital and treated for my injuries. John was arrested and charged with assault, stalking, and harassment. It turned out that he had a long history of violent behavior and had been in and out of mental institutions for years. I was traumatized by the experience and struggled with nightmares and panic attacks for months. I had to undergo therapy to help me deal with the aftermath of the horror I had gone through. From that day on, I never took online dating lightly. I realized that behind the anonymity of a dating app, there could be dangerous and unpredictable people lurking. I made sure to take all the necessary precautions and always met potential dates in public places. John's face still haunts me to this day, and I always wonder what would have happened if those people hadn't come to my rescue. Months had passed since the incident with John, but the trauma of that night lingered on. I had moved to a new apartment and changed my phone number, but I still couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was watching me. One night, I woke up to a loud banging on my door. I looked through the peephole, but I couldn't see anyone. The knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. I grabbed a baseball bat and slowly opened the door. To my horror, I saw John standing on the other side, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. He had somehow found out where I lived and had followed me home. I tried to slam the door shut, but he wedged his foot in the gap and pushed his way inside. I screamed for help, but it was too late. John had me cornered in my own apartment, and there was no way out. He laughed as he pulled out a knife, relishing in the fear he had instilled in me. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at him, hitting him square in the face. He stumbled backward, dropping the knife. I seized the opportunity and bolted for the door, running down the hallway as fast as I could. I could hear John's footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I knew that if he caught me, it would be the end. I made it to the stairwell and sprinted down the stairs, hearing his maniacal laughter echoing behind me. When I reached the ground floor, I burst out of the door and ran into the street, not stopping until I had put several blocks between me and John. I collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for air and shaking with fear. It took me months to recover from the trauma of that night. I had to move to a new city, change my identity, and start over from scratch. I never told anyone what had happened, afraid that John would somehow find me again. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night. I wake up drenched in sweat, feeling John's cold breath on my neck. I've learned the hard way that sometimes, the dangers that lurk on the internet can follow you home. Despite my efforts to move on and leave the past behind, the memories of John and the horror he had inflicted on me continued to haunt me. I became increasingly paranoid and developed an acute fear of being alone or in the dark. One night, while I was watching TV in my new apartment, I heard a scratching sound coming from the front door. My heart raced as I slowly got up and approached the door, peering through the peephole. I couldn't see anything, but the scratching continued, growing louder and more persistent. Suddenly, the door burst open, and John stumbled into my apartment, his face twisted into a demonic grin. I backed away, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. But he was fast, and before I could react, he had grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground. I struggled to break free, gasping for air as his grip tightened. Just when I thought it was all over, I heard a loud knock on the door. John hesitated for a moment, giving me the chance to break free and run towards the door. I yanked it open and saw a group of police officers standing outside, their guns drawn. They ordered John to drop his weapon and surrender, but he refused, lunging towards me once again. In a split-second decision, I grabbed a nearby vase and smashed it over his head, knocking him unconscious. The police rushed in and took him into custody, and I collapsed onto the floor, shaking with fear and relief. It turned out that John had been stalking me for years, using various aliases and fake identities to keep tabs on my every move. He had spent countless hours watching me through hidden cameras, listening to my conversations, and gathering information on my friends and family. He had become obsessed with me to the point of insanity, and his twisted desires had led him down a path of violence and terror. It was a horror story that I never thought I would live through, but somehow, I had survived. The aftermath of the incident was long and painful. I had to undergo extensive therapy to deal with the trauma and the scars that it had left behind. But in the end, I came out stronger, more resilient, and determined never to let anyone have that kind of power over me again. John was sentenced to life in prison, but even now, I can still feel his presence, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the chance to strike again. It's a fear that will never truly go away, but one that I have learned to live with, knowing that I have the strength and the courage to face whatever horrors the future may hold. Years had passed since the incident with John, and I had slowly started to rebuild my life. I had moved to a new city, made new friends, and even started dating again. But the trauma of what had happened with John was always at the back of my mind, and I was hesitant to trust anyone new. One night, while browsing through Tinder, I came across a profile that caught my eye. The person seemed friendly, charming, and genuine, and we quickly struck up a conversation. We talked for hours, sharing stories and getting to know each other, and before I knew it, we had made plans to meet in person. As the day of our date approached, I became increasingly nervous. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I tried to push my doubts aside and went ahead with the date, meeting my Tinder match at a local bar. At first, everything seemed to be going well. We talked and laughed, and I started to feel more comfortable around him. But then, as the night went on, I noticed something strange. Every time I looked away, he would stare at me intensely, his eyes filled with a kind of hunger that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it and enjoy the rest of the night, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. As we said goodbye, my Tinder match leaned in for a kiss, but I pulled away, feeling his breath on my face. It was then that I realized the terrible truth. My Tinder match was none other than John, the same man who had terrorized me years ago. He had used a fake profile and a new identity to trick me into meeting him, hoping to pick up where he had left off. I backed away, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. But he was fast, and before I could react, he had grabbed me by the arm and pulled me towards him. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. Just when I thought it was all over, a group of police officers burst into the bar, guns drawn. They ordered John to surrender, but he refused, pulling out a knife and holding it to my throat. It was a moment of sheer terror, one that I never thought I would live through again. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the police officers stepped forward, revealing himself to be an undercover detective who had been tracking John for months. He managed to distract John long enough for the other officers to subdue him, and I collapsed onto the ground, shaking with fear and relief. It was a twist of fate that I never could have predicted, but one that had saved my life. The world of online dating was filled with danger and uncertainty, but I had learned to be more cautious and vigilant, knowing that the dangers that lurked in the shadows could strike at any time. In the aftermath of the terrifying encounter with John, I found myself unable to trust anyone, even those I had known for years. Every stranger on the street seemed to be a potential threat, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. But life had to go on, and I slowly started to push through my fear. I focused on my work, my hobbies, and my friends, trying to find a sense of normalcy in the chaos. One night, I was at home, scrolling through Tinder, when I came across a profile that caught my eye. The person seemed genuine, kind, and honest, and something about their profile picture spoke to me in a way that I couldn't quite explain. We started talking, and I found myself feeling more and more comfortable around them. We shared a lot of interests and hobbies, and I could feel myself starting to trust them, even if it was just a little bit. We decided to meet in person, and I couldn't help but feel a little bit nervous. But as soon as we met, all my fears melted away. They were even more charming and kind in person, and I found myself smiling and laughing in a way that I hadn't in years. We spent the evening walking around the city, talking and enjoying each other's company. As the night went on, I started to feel a connection that I hadn't felt in a long time, and I knew that this was someone special. We ended the night with a kiss, and I felt my heart swelling with joy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found someone who truly understood me. But just as I was about to walk away, something caught my eye. It was a familiar figure, one that I had thought was long gone. It was John, standing in the shadows, watching us. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in fear. But as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't John at all. It was just someone who looked like him, someone who had the same build and hair color. It was a coincidence, a random chance encounter that had triggered my memories of the past. And as I looked back at my date, I knew that I was safe, that the world was full of good people as well as bad. I smiled, took my date's hand, and walked away, feeling a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. The horrors of the past had scarred me deeply, but they had also taught me to appreciate the moments of joy and connection that life had to offer. As I walked away from the chance encounter with John's lookalike, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The memories of my past experience with John were still fresh in my mind, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows, just to be safe. I told myself that it was just a coincidence, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't be too careful. As I lay in bed that night, I heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was trying to open one of the windows. My heart racing, I got up and peered out the window, trying to see who it was. But there was no one there, just the darkness of the night. I told myself that it was just my imagination, that I was letting my fear get the best of me. But as I lay back down, I heard the noise again, louder this time. I got up once more, my hands shaking, and went to the window. And that's when I saw him. It was John, standing outside my house, looking straight at me with a sinister grin on his face. My blood ran cold, and I froze in fear. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call the police, but I was afraid that if I moved, he would see me and try to break in. And then I saw him take out a knife, and I knew that I was in real danger. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door, hoping that it would hold. But I could hear him trying to break in, the sound of his knife scraping against the lock. I was trapped, alone, and terrified. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The noise ceased, and I heard footsteps running away from my house. I didn't know what had happened, but I was too scared to leave my room. The next morning, I called the police and told them everything. They searched the area, but they never found John. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. Maybe he got scared and ran away. Maybe he was caught by the police. Or maybe he's still out there, somewhere, waiting for his next victim. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget the horrors of that night, and the way it shattered my sense of safety and security. As I sat in my bedroom, trembling with fear, I heard John muttering something outside my door. At first, I couldn't make out what he was saying, but then his words became clear. "I'm the king of the world," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty halls of my house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I was, in the midst of a life and death situation, and John was acting like a cartoon character. But then he said something even weirder. "I'm a unicorn, and I'm going to ride you to the moon," he yelled, his voice high-pitched and giggly. I felt a wave of revulsion wash over me. This man, this monster, was not only dangerous, but he was also completely insane. And then, just as suddenly as he had started, he stopped. I heard him walk away, his footsteps fading into the distance. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but eventually, I mustered up the courage to leave my bedroom and check on the rest of the house. It was empty, just as I had left it. But I knew that I would never be able to shake the memory of John's bizarre ramblings. In the end, he was caught by the police and put in a mental institution. But the damage had already been done. My life had been changed forever by the horrors of that night, and the strange and unsettling things that John had said would haunt me for years to come. Despite the fact that John was locked away, I never fully recovered from the trauma of that night. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, reliving the horrors of that fateful encounter. But even though I was scared, I refused to let it control my life. I went back on Tinder and started dating again, hoping to find someone who could help me move on from the past. And that's when I met him. He was charming, funny, and attentive, and I found myself falling for him more and more every day. He was everything that John wasn't, and I felt safe and happy around him. But one night, as we were lying in bed together, I heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was trying to break in. I sat up, my heart pounding, and asked him if he heard it too. But he just looked at me with a strange expression on his face. "What are you talking about?" he said. "I don't hear anything." And that's when I knew. He was John, back from the dead, and he had been pretending to be someone else all along. I screamed and tried to run, but he was too fast. He caught me and dragged me back to the bed, a crazed look in his eyes. "You can never escape me," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'll always be here, watching, waiting." And then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was alone, my body bruised and battered. I knew that I had to get out of there, but I was too weak to move. And then I saw him. John was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me. "Welcome to your nightmare," he said, and then he was gone. I never saw him again after that, but I knew that he was always watching, waiting for his next victim. And even though I tried to move on with my life, I was haunted by the fear that he would come back, and that I would never be able to escape him. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more great content. Your support helps us continue to create and share valuable information with you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.